In the rugged frontier of 1870s Montana Territory, a journey of hope becomes a desperate fight for justice. When Charlotte Harrington crossed half a continent to marry a man she knew only through letters, she expected to begin a new life as a rancher's wife. Instead, she found her intended groom imprisoned for a crime he swears he didn't commit, his land coveted by powerful enemies, and a town divided by corruption and greed. Alone in a harsh land, with nothing but her wits and determination, Charlotte must decide: flee back east or stand her ground and fight for a future she never imagined. But in a territory where land and water rights are worth killing for, her choice could cost her everything, even her life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The stagecoach lurched violently as it hit another deep rut in the road, sending Charlotte Harrington sliding across the leather seat. She clutched her travel journal tighter against her chest and braced herself against the wooden frame of the window. The mountain passes of Montana Territory were proving more treacherous than anything she had experienced during her long journey from Philadelphia. First time out west? The elderly woman sitting across from her smiled kindly, her weathered face a map of fine lines that deepened around her eyes. Is it that obvious? Charlotte adjusted her hat, which had become askew during the rough passage. Most newcomers don't realize they ought to wear clothes that won't show all the dust, the woman replied, nodding at Charlotte's dove-grey traveling dress, once pristine when she'd boarded the train in Philadelphia 3 weeks ago. Now it was coated with a fine layer of reddish-brown dust, the hem frayed and dirty. Charlotte sighed. I suppose I have a great deal to learn about frontier life. In truth, she had given little thought to such practical matters when she'd packed her trunks. Her mind had been filled with romantic notions about reuniting with Benjamin Hayes, the man whose letters had captivated her for the past 10 months. A cattle rancher with a growing operation outside a town called Silver Creek, Benjamin had placed an advertisement in an eastern newspaper seeking a bride. His letters had been articulate, thoughtful, and increasingly affectionate. At 28 years old, Charlotte had resigned herself to spinsterhood. The war had taken so many young men, and her position as a schoolteacher in Philadelphia offered security but little opportunity for romance. Benjamin's letters had awakened something in her she thought had died, hope for a family of her own. "Silver Creek, folks, we'll be stopping at Wilson's General Store," the driver called down. Charlotte's heart quickened. After months of correspondence and weeks of travel, she was finally here. She smoothed her dress as best she could and checked that her honey-blonde hair was still somewhat presentable under her hat. The stagecoach came to a stop in a cloud of dust, and the driver opened the door. "Watch your step now," he said, offering his hand. Charlotte stepped down onto the main street of Silver Creek and looked around at what was to be her new home. A single dirt road lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, what appeared to be a bank, and various other businesses. Nothing like the bustling streets of Philadelphia, but there was a certain frontier charm to it. "Miss Harrington?" A tall man with silver-streaked brown hair approached her. He had kind eyes, but a somber expression that immediately sent a chill through her. "Yes, that's me," she replied, extending her hand. "I'm Jacob Wilson, owner of the general store and postmaster." He took off his hat and held it in his hands. "I'm afraid I have some difficult news." The world seemed to slow around. "Is Benjamin all right?" Wilson's eyes dropped to the ground. "Mr. Hayes has been imprisoned, Miss Harrington. He was arrested 3 weeks ago and taken to the territorial prison in Helena." Charlotte felt as though the ground had fallen away beneath her feet. She swayed slightly, and Mr. Wilson reached out to steady her. "Imprisoned? On what charges?" she managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. "Cattle rustling and the murder of a neighboring rancher," Wilson replied grimly, "though many of us here believe he's innocent." "This can't be right," Charlotte said. In his letters, Benjamin spoke of neighborly relations, and things changed quickly, Wilson interrupted. There's more you should know. Judge Prescott, who sentenced him, is the brother-in-law of Victor Holloway, who's been trying to buy Benjamin's land for years. Charlotte tried to absorb this information, but her mind was reeling. I don't understand. If there's a conflict of interest, surely. Justice works differently out here, Miss Harrington, Wilson said quietly. Especially when water rights are involved. Charlotte drew a deep breath. Do you have family back east you can return to? Wilson asked gently. The question brought the reality of her situation crashing down. Her teaching position had been filled. She had sold most of her possessions to finance this journey. Her parents were long dead, and her only brother had moved to California years ago. Communication between them sporadic at best. No, she said quietly. There's nothing for me to go back to. Wilson looked uncomfortable. Well, I'm sure we can. Arrange for you to stay at the boarding house for a few days while you decide what to do. Mrs. Thompson is a kind woman, though her rates are... I can pay, Charlotte said quickly, though she knew her funds were limited. She'd expected to step into a marriage and a home, not to be stranded in a strange town with her intended in prison. There's also the matter of Mr. Hayes's property, Wilson continued, the ranch, the cattle. Before Wilson could elaborate, a commotion from the saloon across the street drew their attention. The swinging doors burst open, and a large man with a thick mustache and expensive clothes stumbled out, followed by another man who was shouting angrily. You think you can just take Hayes's land now that he's locked up? The second man yelled. The bank has the first claim, Patterson, and don't you forget it, the well-dressed man snarled back. That land was promised to me, Holloway. Hayes knew he owed me. Wilson shook his head. I apologize for this display, Miss Harrington. Victor Holloway's death has stirred up some conflicts of interest in our town. Victor Holloway? Charlotte asked, confused. I thought you said he was trying to buy Benjamin's land. No, that's Victor Holloway, Jr., Wilson clarified. His father was the rancher Benjamin is accused of killing. Charlotte felt her head spin with this new information. So Benjamin is accused of killing the father of the man who wants his land. It's complicated. Wilson sighed. Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside. He led her into the general store, a large, well-stocked establishment with shelves of canned goods, tools, fabrics, and other necessities. At the back was a small office where he offered her a seat. Tea? He asked, and she nodded gratefully. While he prepared it, Charlotte tried to collect her thoughts. Benjamin was in prison, accused of murdering a neighbor. The son of the murdered man wanted Benjamin's land, and somehow the judge who sentenced Benjamin was related to these people. None of it made sense. Wilson returned with 2 cups of tea and sat across from her. Miss Harrington, Benjamin Hayes was well-liked in Silver Creek, but his business dealings were complicated. Victor Holloway Sr. controlled most of the water access in the Northern Valley. Benjamin's ranch has the only year-round creek on the southern side. The Holloways have been trying to acquire it for years. Benjamin never mentioned any of this in his letters, Charlotte said. Men don't like to worry their women folk with such matters, Wilson replied. The point is, with him in prison, there are several parties who believe they have a claim to his ranch. The bank holds the mortgage. Patterson claims Benjamin promised him land in exchange for help during last year's drought, and Holloway Jr. insists the land should be forfeited since Benjamin allegedly killed his father. But what about me? Charlotte asked. Surely, as his intended wife, I have some claim. Wilson looked uncomfortable. Without a formal marriage having taken place, I'm afraid the law doesn't recognize your position as having any legal standing. Unless Mr. Hayes left a will naming you specifically. I see. Charlotte's voice was small. I'm truly sorry, Miss Harrington. If you need employment while you decide what to do, my wife could use help in the store. It's not much, but it would. Provide you with some income. The offer was kind, but the reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. She had left everything behind for a new life that had evaporated before she even arrived. I appreciate that, Mr. Wilson. I may take you up on it. She rose from her chair. For now, I think I should get settled at the boarding house. Wilson nodded. Of course. I'll have your trunks delivered there. Mrs. Thompson's place is just down the street, the white house with the blue shutters. As Charlotte left the general store, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the dusty street. The town seemed different now, no longer the setting of a hopeful new beginning, but a strange and potentially hostile place where she had no ties, no protection. She was halfway to the boarding house when she heard hoofbeats behind her. Turning, she saw a lone rider approaching slowly. He sat tall in the saddle of a chestnut mare, his posture speaking of quiet confidence and authority. He wore a long duster, and as he drew closer, Charlotte could see a silver star pinned to his vest. His features were striking, strong jawline, keen blue eyes beneath the brim of his hat, and a certain watchfulness that made her instinctively straighten her posture. The rider stopped his horse a few feet from her. "Miss Harrington?" "Yes," she replied, surprised. "How do you know my name?" "This is a small town," he said simply. "News travels fast." He dismounted in one fluid motion and tipped his hat. "Marshal Nathan Blackwell, Federal Marshal for the Montana Territory." "Marshal Blackwell," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "I don't believe Benjamin mentioned you in his letters." A shadow crossed the man's face. "Benjamin Hayes and I have a complicated history, but I don't believe he killed Victor." "Holloway," Charlotte's breath caught. "You don't?" Marshal Blackwell glanced around, as if checking who might be listening. The evidence was circumstantial at best. Holloway was shot from behind on Hayes's property with Hayes's rifle. Too convenient, if you ask me. "If you believed him innocent, why couldn't you stop them from sending him to prison?" Charlotte asked, a hint of accusation in her voice. "I was tracking a gang of outlaws near the Wyoming border when it happened," he explained. "By the time I returned, the trial was over and Hayes was on his way to Helena. Judge Prescott made sure things moved quickly. Mr. Wilson told me the judge is related to the Holloways. Brother-in-law to the deceased and uncle to the son," Blackwell confirmed. "A clear conflict of interest, but out here there aren't many options for judges. I've been gathering evidence since I returned, trying to build a case for appeal." Hope flickered in Charlotte's chest for the first time since stepping off the stagecoach. "Then Benjamin might be released?" "If I can find proof he was framed, yes, but it won't be easy. The Holloways have influence in this territory." "Why are you telling me this, Marshal? We've only just met." Blackwell's expression softened slightly. "Hayes wrote to me from prison. Asked me to look out for you if I could. Said you were coming west to be his bride, and that you might need protection from the same people who framed him. Why would he ask you if you have a complicated history? Because despite our differences, he knows I believe in justice," Blackwell replied. "And because there aren't many people in Silver Creek who would stand against the Holloways." Charlotte studied him. There was a hardness to him, but also something else, a sense of integrity, perhaps. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "What exactly are you suggesting, Marshal Blackwell?" "I'm suggesting that you be careful who you trust in Silver Creek. And I'm offering to help you understand what really happened to Hayes and what it means for you." "I appreciate the warning," Charlotte said cautiously, "but I still don't understand why Benjamin would be framed for murder or why his land is so important." "The Hayes Ranch sits on the watershed that feeds the Southern Valley," Blackwell explained. "Whoever controls that water controls the future of ranching in this region. The railroad's coming through next year, and land with water rights will be worth 10 times what it is now." Before Charlotte could respond, a shout from down the street caught their attention. Victor Holloway, Jr. was striding toward them with purpose, his hand resting near the gun at his hip. "Blackwell," he bellowed, "what are you doing talking to Hayes's woman?" The Marshal's posture remained relaxed, but Charlotte sensed he was alert to potential danger. "Just introducing myself, Holloway. Basic courtesy, something you might try sometime." Holloway sneered. "We don't need your kind of courtesy around. Here," he turned to Charlotte. "Miss, you should know that Hayes's ranch will be mine soon enough. The bank might hold the papers, but with him locked up for killing my father, that land will be forfeit. You'd be wise to take the next stage out of Silver Creek." "Is that a threat, Mr. Holloway?" Charlotte asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Call it friendly advice," Holloway said. "This territory isn't kind to women alone." "Miss Harrington isn't alone," Blackwell said evenly. "She has the protection of the United States Marshal Service." Holloway's face reddened. "You're overstepping, Blackwell. This is a local matter. Murder and land fraud are federal concerns, Holloway, especially when they involve a judge with a conflict of interest." For a tense moment, the two men stared at each other. Then Holloway spat on the ground and turned back to Charlotte. "You'd do well to stay away from this one, miss. He's got no jurisdiction in local court matters. And if you're thinking you have any claim to Hayes's property, think again. He died owing debts all over this county." "Benjamin Hayes isn't dead," Charlotte corrected him firmly. "And I intend to visit him in Helena as soon as possible." Something flashed in Holloway's eyes, surprise and perhaps concern. "Waste of your time. He'll be in prison for 20 years. Or hanging once they find out what else he's done. With me." That ominous statement, Holloway stormed off toward the saloon. "What did he mean by that?" Charlotte asked, turning to Blackwell. "I'm not sure," the Marshal admitted. "But it worries me. Holloway's not the type to make idle threats." He studied for a moment. "Miss Harrington, I have rooms above the Marshal's office. It's not fancy, but it's secure. You'd be safer there than at the boarding house, at least until we figure out what's really going on." Charlotte was taken aback. "Marshal Blackwell, I barely know you. It wouldn't be proper." "My deputy and his wife live in the building as well," he added. "Your reputation would be safe, but it's your choice. I'm just trying to keep a promise to a man who asked for my help." Charlotte considered her options. Stay at the boarding house in a town where she knew no one and might be in danger. Try to make her way back east with limited funds, or trust this Marshal who claimed to believe in Benjamin's innocence. "I need to collect my trunks," she said finally. "They're being delivered to the boarding house." Blackwell nodded. "We'll stop there first. I'll wait outside while you explain to Mrs. Thompson that you've made other arrangements." As they walked toward the boarding house, Charlotte couldn't help but wonder if she was making a terrible mistake. But there was something about Marshal Blackwell, a steadiness, an integrity, that made her want to trust him. The sun had almost disappeared behind the distant mountains, casting the town in deepening shadows. As darkness fell over Silver Creek, Charlotte Harrington made her decision. She would accept Marshal Blackwell's protection, she would visit Benjamin in prison, and she would discover the truth about the murder that had upended her plans for a new life in Montana Territory. What she couldn't know was that the danger was only beginning, and that before long, her life would depend on unraveling a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of territorial power. A conspiracy that had already sent an innocent man to prison and wouldn't hesitate to silence anyone who threatened to expose the truth. Journey to Marshal Blackwell's office was mercifully short. Charlotte felt the stares of Silver Creek's residents following her as she walked beside the tall lawman, her trunks loaded onto a small wagon driven by Deputy Frank Miller, a younger man with a friendly face and perpetual smile. "Don't mind the gawkers," Blackwell said quietly. "News of your arrival spread faster than a prairie fire. You're something of a curiosity." "A cautionary tale, more likely," Charlotte replied. the Eastern woman who traveled across the country to marry a prisoner. A ghost of a smile touched Blackwell's lips. They don't know you yet. The Marshal's office was a solid two-story building of stone and timber situated at the end of Main Street. The ground floor housed a small jail with 2 cells, currently empty, and Blackwell's sparse but organized desk. A narrow staircase led to the second floor where Charlotte discovered there were 3 rooms, one for the Marshal, one for Deputy Miller and his wife Sarah, and a small but clean guest room that would be hers. Sarah Miller was a petite woman with bright eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She welcomed Charlotte warmly, helping her settle into the guest room and providing fresh water for washing. "It's not much," Sarah apologized, "but it's secure. Nathan, Marshal Blackwell, he's a good man. If he's looking out for you, you're in safe hands." "Thank you," Charlotte said, touched by the woman's kindness. "I confess, this isn't how I imagined. My arrival in Silver Creek would be—" "Few things out here turn out as expected," Sarah replied with a knowing smile. "The West has a way of testing people, showing what they're really made of." She paused, then added more softly, "Benjamin Hayes is a good man too. Many of us don't believe what they say about him." Before Charlotte could question her further, a knock came at the door. Marshal Blackwell stood in the hallway, hat in hand. "Miss Harrington, if you're feeling up to it, I'd like to go over some details about Hayes's case. It might help you understand what's happened and what's at stake." Downstairs, the Marshal spread a map across his desk. It showed Silver Creek and the surrounding territory, with property lines clearly marked. He pointed to a large section of land south of town. "This is Hayes's ranch, nearly 500 acres of prime grazing land, with the only reliable year-round creek for miles. To the north," his finger moved across the map, "these 3 ranches belong to the Holloway family. Victor Sr. controlled them until his death. His son now owns them all." "They look larger than Benjamin's property," Charlotte observed. "They are, but they lack reliable water. That's why Hayes's land is so valuable, especially with the railroad coming through next year." Blackwell pointed to a dotted line that cut across the territory. "The Silver Creek Station will be built here, which means cattle operations will boom. Whoever controls the water controls the future. So the Holloways want Benjamin's land for the water rights?" "Precisely. Victor Sr. tried to buy the property legitimately for years. Hayes always refused to sell. Then suddenly, Victor is found, dead on Hayes's land, shot with Hayes's rifle, and Hayes is conveniently the only witness." "That sounds like a frame," Charlotte said. "It does, especially when the victim's brother-in-law is the judge." Blackwell pulled out a folder of papers. "Here's what we know for certain. On the morning of April 12th, Hayes rode out to check on his southern fence line. Around noon, he found Victor Holloway Sr. dead on his property. Hayes reported it immediately, riding into town to get sheriff. "Rankin, that doesn't sound like the action of a guilty man," Charlotte noted. "My thought exactly. Why report it if you committed the murder?" But by evening, Hayes was in jail. Victor Jr. identified his father's body, then accused Hayes of luring his father to a remote section of the ranch to kill him. Hayes's rifle was found nearby, recently fired, with his fingerprints on it. Could someone have stolen his rifle? Blackwell nodded approvingly. "That was my first question. Hayes claims he kept it locked in his gun cabinet. But when Sheriff Rankin searched the house, the cabinet was unlocked and the rifle missing. So, someone took his rifle, used it to kill Mr. Holloway, and left it at the scene to implicate Benjamin," Charlotte reasoned. "That's Hayes's claim, but with no witnesses and no evidence of anyone else on the property, Judge Prescott dismissed the theory outright. The trial lasted all of 2 days. Charlotte's mind was racing. What about motive? Surely Benjamin had no reason to kill his neighbor, especially if doing so would only cause more problems. According to Victor Jr., his father had gone to confront Hayes about cattle that had wandered onto Holloway land. He claimed the 2 men had a history of disputes, Did they? Minor disagreements, nothing unusual for neighboring ranches. Certainly nothing that justified murder. Blackwell leaned back in his chair. What bothers me most is the speed of it all. Hayes was arrested, tried, convicted, and sent to Helena within a week, almost as if someone wanted him gone before anyone could ask too many questions. Charlotte frowned. You mentioned you were gathering evidence for an appeal. What have you found? Not enough yet. Several ranch hands who worked for Hayes were mysteriously dismissed after his arrest. I've been trying to track them down, but they've scattered, and there's a discrepancy in the coroner's report about the angle of the bullet wound. It suggests Holloway was shot from an elevated position, not level ground, as the prosecution claimed. Have you been to Benjamin's ranch? Charlotte asked suddenly. Not yet. Sheriff Rankin has it locked down, claims it's part of an ongoing investigation. In reality, he's keeping people away until the bank can legally foreclose. Charlotte straightened. In her chair, a determination taking root inside her. I want to see it. Blackwell raised an eyebrow. The ranch? That might not be wise. Sheriff Rankin answers to the Holloways, and Benjamin's letters described the ranch in detail. He was so proud of what he'd built there. I need to see it. For myself. She met Blackwell's gaze steadily. And I intend to visit him in prison. I've traveled too far to turn back now. The Marshal studied her, a new respect dawning in his eyes. Helena is a 3-day ride. The prison only allows visitors on Wednesdays. Today is Sunday. If we left tomorrow, we could be there in time. Blackwell almost smiled. We? I assume you wouldn't let me travel alone, given the concerns you've expressed about my safety. And I imagine you'd like to speak with Benjamin as well. Charlotte's tone was matter-of-fact, as if the decision had already been made. After a moment, Blackwell nodded. I would indeed. Very well, Miss Harrington. We'll leave for Helena tomorrow. But first I think we should visit the Hayes Ranch. Preferably when Sheriff Rankin is occupied elsewhere. Such as tonight, when he'll be playing poker at the Silver Nugget until the early hours, as he does every Sunday. As darkness fell completely over Silver Creek, Charlotte found herself riding beside Marshal Blackwell on a borrowed mare, heading south toward Benjamin's ranch. Deputy Miller had stayed behind to maintain a presence at the office and to ensure their absence wasn't noted. The night was clear, stars glittering overhead in a vast canopy that stretched from horizon to horizon. In Philadelphia, the night sky had never seemed so immense, so filled with possibilities and mysteries. Despite her exhaustion and the shock of the day's revelations, Charlotte felt a strange sense of exhilaration. She was riding through the Montana wilderness with a federal marshal to investigate a murder for which her intended husband had been wrongfully imprisoned. Nothing in her previous life had prepared her for this. It's about 2 miles ahead, Blackwell said, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. We'll approach from the east, through that stand of cottonwoods. Less chance of being spotted. Do you expect someone to be watching the property? Victor Jr. has men patrolling the boundaries, supposedly to prevent trespassing. In reality, they're making sure no one examines the scene too carefully. They rode in silence for another mile. Then Blackwell raised his hand, signaling Charlotte to stop. He dismounted and helped her down from her horse. We'll walk from here, he whispered. Less noise. Leading the horses by their reins, they moved carefully through the trees. The moon provided just enough light to see by, casting long shadows across the rolling landscape. As they crested a small rise, Charlotte caught her first glimpse of the Hayes Ranch spread out below them. Even in the moonlight, she could tell it was a beautiful property. A sturdy 2-story farmhouse stood in a clearing, surrounded by outbuildings, a large barn, a bunkhouse, and several smaller structures. A corral stood empty beside the barn, and beyond it, pastureland stretched toward distant hills. A creek glinted like silver ribbon in the moonlight, winding its way through the property. It's exactly as he described it, Charlotte whispered, her throat tight with emotion. This was to have been her home, her future with Benjamin. Blackwell tied their horses to a tree. "Stay close. We need to check the house first, make sure it's empty." They moved cautiously down the slope toward the ranch house. No lights showed in any of the windows, and the place had a deserted feel that sent a shiver down Charlotte's spine. Blackwell led the way to the back door, drawing his pistol as a precaution. He tried the handle. Locked. "Wait here," he murmured, disappearing around the side of the house. Moments later, Charlotte heard a soft scraping sound, and Blackwell reappeared at the door, now standing open. "Window latch was loose," he explained, holstering his weapon. "Come on." Inside, the house was dark and still. Blackwell lit a small lantern he'd brought, keeping the flame low. The kitchen was neat and well-equipped, though a thin layer of dust covered the surfaces. They moved through the house slowly, taking in the comfortable, masculine furnishings. A large stone fireplace in the main room, solid oak furniture, bookshelves filled with volumes on ranching, history, and literature. Benjamin was well read, Charlotte observed, running her fingers along the spines of the books. Hayes was always more cultured than most ranchers, Blackwell agreed. Came out west with a degree from Harvard, if you can believe it. This was news to Charlotte. He mentioned studying in Boston, but not Harvard specifically. He doesn't advertise it. Out here, being too educated can sometimes be a liability. They continued their exploration, finding a study with a desk piled with papers, ledgers, correspondence, ranch records, all left exactly as they had been when Benjamin was arrested. Charlotte examined the documents while Blackwell checked. The gun cabinet, which stood open and empty except for a shotgun and a hunting rifle. "His revolver is missing too," Blackwell noted. "Strange, the arrest report only mentioned the rifle." In the study, Charlotte had found something interesting. A leather-bound journal. "Marshal, look at this." She opened it to the last entry, dated April 11th, the day before Victor Holloway's murder. "Holloway came by again today with another offer for the property. Triple what it's worth on paper, but still not enough considering what's coming. I refused. Of course, he didn't take it well, threatened to make me regret it. Not the first threat I've received lately. Someone cut my fence last week, and 2 calves went missing. I've written to Charlotte that all is well. No need to worry her before she arrives. I've also asked Nathan to keep an eye on things if anything happens to me. Despite our past differences, I trust him to do what's right." Blackwell read the entry twice, his expression grave. "This is evidence of threats against Hayes prior to the murder. It should have been presented at trial. Was it? No. According to the trial transcript, no journal was entered into evidence." Blackwell carefully closed the book. "We need to take this with us." They continued searching the house, moving upstairs to the bedrooms. The master bedroom was large and airy, with a handmade quilt on the bed and a dresser with a man's personal items arranged neatly on top, a silver pocket watch, a hairbrush, cufflinks. Adjacent to it was a smaller room that had been recently prepared. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, and a vase of now dried wildflowers sat on a small table. "He made this room ready for you," Blackwell said softly. Charlotte felt tears prick at her eyes. This should have been her room, in her home with her husband down the hall. Instead, Benjamin was in prison, and she was an intruder in what should have been her own house. A sudden noise from outside froze them both, horses approaching, several of them, at a gallop. "Someone's coming," Blackwell whispered, extinguishing the lantern. Quickly, out the back. They hurried downstairs and out the back door, closing it carefully behind them. Blackwell led Charlotte to a small root cellar built into a hillside behind the house, its doors lying flat against the ground. They slipped inside just as riders entered the front yard. Through a crack in the cellar doors, they could see 4 men dismounting, led by a figure Charlotte recognized as Victor Holloway, Jr. The men carried lanterns, their faces harsh in the yellow glow. "Check the house," Holloway ordered. "Someone's been here. Simmons saw a light." Two men headed toward the house, while Holloway and the fourth man remained in the yard, scanning the property. "Think it's Blackwell?" the fourth man asked. "Could be. He's been asking too many questions. Or maybe it's that Eastern woman Hayes sent for. Either way, I want them found." Charlotte and Blackwell huddled in the darkness of the cellar, barely daring to breathe. The air was damp and earthy, heavy with the scent of stored potatoes and preserves. "The house is empty, boss," one of the men reported, returning to the yard. "But someone's definitely been inside. Things are disturbed in the study." Holloway cursed. "Search the outbuildings. They can't have gone far." For the next tense half-hour, Charlotte and Blackwell remained hidden as Holloway's men searched the property. Finally, the men returned to the yard, reporting no sign of intruders. "They must have spotted us coming and fled," one suggested. Holloway seemed dissatisfied, but nodded. "Double the patrols from now on. I don't want anyone poking around here, especially not Blackwell or that woman. We've got too much at stake." "What about the journal?" the fourth man asked. "Did they find it?" "Check the study again," Holloway ordered. One of the men hurried back to the house, returning minutes later. "It's gone, boss." Holloway slammed his fist against his saddle. "Damn it! That journal had Hayes's notes about the water survey. If Blackwell gets his hands on that—" "Maybe they didn't take it," one man suggested. "Maybe Hayes hid it somewhere else before he was arrested." "Find it," Holloway snapped. "Tear this place apart if you have to. I want that journal found before anyone can use it to help Hayes." The men dispersed, and for the next hour, Charlotte and Blackwell listened as they ransacked the house and outbuildings. Furniture was overturned, floorboards pried up, walls tapped for hollow spaces. Finally, Holloway called off the search. "We'll come back tomorrow with more men. That journal has to be here somewhere." After the riders had departed, Blackwell and Charlotte waited an additional half-hour before cautiously emerging from their hiding place. "What water survey was Holloway talking about?" Charlotte whispered as they made their way back to their horses. "I'm not sure," Blackwell admitted. "But whatever it is, it must be important enough that Holloway is worried about it coming to light." They mounted quickly and rode away from the ranch, taking a different route back to Silver Creek to avoid encountering Holloway's men. The moon had set, and they rode in near darkness, guided only by the stars and Blackwell's knowledge of the terrain. "We need to leave for Helena first thing in the morning," Blackwell said as they approached town. "If Holloway realizes we have the journal, he might try to prevent us from reaching Hayes." "The journal doesn't mention any water survey," Charlotte pointed out. "At least not in the entry we read. There might be more. We'll examine it thoroughly back at the office, then keep it safe until we can present it to the territorial governor, along with a petition for Hayes's case to be reopened." As the first light of dawn began to color the eastern sky, they reached Silver Creek. The town was still sleeping, the streets deserted. Deputy Miller met them at the back door of the Marshal's office, relief evident on his face. "Thank goodness you're back. Sheriff Rankin was here looking for you, Marshal. Said there was a disturbance reported at the Hayes Ranch." Blackwell's expression remained neutral. "Did he now? And what did you tell him?" "That you were investigating. Reports of cattle rustling near the northern border and wouldn't be back until morning. He seemed to accept it, but he wasn't happy." Inside, Charlotte immediately went to her room to pack for the journey to Helena, while Blackwell and Miller examined Benjamin's journal more thoroughly. When she returned downstairs, both men looked grim. "We found something," Blackwell said, motioning her over to the desk. "Several entries about a geological survey Hayes commissioned last winter. Apparently, he hired an expert from Denver to evaluate water resources on his property." "And?" Charlotte prompted. "And they found evidence of a substantial underground aquifer, much larger than anyone suspected. If this report is accurate, Hayes's land sits above enough water to irrigate the entire southern valley for decades, regardless of drought conditions. The implications were clear. That would make his land invaluable, especially with the railroad coming. Exactly. According to these entries, Hayes received the final report on April 10th, just 2 days before Holloway was murdered on his property. Did Benjamin tell anyone about the survey results? Blackwell turned to the final pages of the journal. He planned to announce it at the town council meeting scheduled for April 15th. He never got the chance. So someone killed Victor Holloway. Senior and frame Benjamin to prevent the survey results from becoming public knowledge, Charlotte reasoned. But why kill the father rather than Benjamin himself? 2 birds, 1 stone, Deputy Miller suggested. Get rid of the elder Holloway, who might have opposed his son's more aggressive tactics, and frame Hayes at the same time. It's a theory, Blackwell agreed, but we need more than theories to free Hayes. We need evidence, Charlotte thought. In for a moment. The survey itself, where is it? Benjamin must have received a written report. There's no mention of where he kept it, Blackwell said, flipping through the journal again. But if it's as valuable as I think it is, he wouldn't have left it lying around. A bank vault, perhaps, Charlotte suggested. Blackwell shook his head. The bank president is Holloway's cousin. Hayes wouldn't have trusted him with something this sensitive. Charlotte remembered something from Benjamin's letters, a detail she'd found charming at the time. In his letters, Benjamin mentioned a hiding place where he kept important documents, a false bottom in an old sea chest that belonged to his grandfather. He said it was the safest place on the ranch because no one would think to look there. Did he mention where he kept this chest? Charlotte closed her eyes, trying to recall the exact wording of the letter. In the attic, I believe. He said it was the coolest place in summer and the warmest in winter. Blackwell and Miller exchanged a look. We didn't check the attic, the Marshal admitted. We need to go back, Charlotte said, her voice firm. Too risky, Blackwell countered. Holloway's men will be watching the place closely now. Our priority should be getting to Helena to see Hayes. He can tell us exactly where the survey is hidden. Charlotte recognized the logic in his plan, reluctant as she was to delay finding the evidence that might free Benjamin. Very well. When do we leave? Within the hour, Blackwell replied. Miller will stay here to keep an eye on things and to throw Sheriff Rankin off our trail if necessary. As they prepared for the journey, gathering supplies and saddling fresh horses, Charlotte felt a strange mix of emotions. Fear for what lay ahead, determination to help Benjamin, and an unexpected spark of excitement at the adventure unfolding. Before her, her life as a Philadelphia schoolteacher seemed distant now, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. Whatever happened in Helena, Charlotte knew with certainty that she was no longer the same woman who had stepped off the stagecoach. Just yesterday, Silver Creek and its mysteries had already begun to change her, stripping away the comfortable veneer of her Eastern upbringing and revealing a core of resilience she hadn't known she possessed. As she mounted her horse and followed Marshal Blackwell out of town, Charlotte realized she was riding not just toward a prison where Benjamin awaited, but toward a future that promised both danger and possibility in equal measure. The journey to Helena proved more arduous than Charlotte had anticipated. Though the mid-May weather was fair, the trail was rough, winding through rugged terrain that tested both riders and horses. They made camp the first night in a sheltered valley beside a small creek, where Blackwell built a modest fire and prepared a simple meal of beans, jerky, and coffee. As darkness settled around them, Charlotte found herself studying the Marshal across the flickering flames. In the firelight, his features seemed both harder and more vulnerable, the lines around his eyes deeper, the set of his mouth less stern. "You mentioned a complicated history with Benjamin," she said, breaking the comfortable silence. "May I ask what happened between you?" Blackwell's gaze remained on the fire for a long moment, We grew up together in Missouri. Our fathers had neighboring farms. We were friends once, almost like brothers. What changed? The war. Blackwell poured himself more coffee. I joined the Union Army. Hayes joined the Confederacy. Charlotte hadn't expected this. Nothing in Benjamin's letters had mentioned his service during the war. That must have been difficult. War makes enemies of friends. We both survived, but we found ourselves on opposite sides of too many battlefields to simply forget when it was over. Blackwell's voice held no bitterness, only a quiet resignation. After the war, I joined the Marshal's service. Hayes went west to start fresh. It was years before our paths crossed again. Here in Montana? Yes. I was assigned to this territory 3 years ago. By then, Hayes had established his ranch and made a name for himself in Silver Creek. We managed to establish a truce of sorts. Not friendship, but mutual respect. Enough for him to trust you if something happened to him, Charlotte observed. Blackwell nodded. Hayes knew I'd put justice above personal feelings. That's why I'm certain he didn't kill Holloway. He's stubborn, proud, and too smart for his own good sometimes, but he's not a murderer. Charlotte appreciated the Marshal's candor. In his letters, Benjamin described himself as someone who valued honesty above all else. He said the Montana Territory was a place where a person could build something meaningful away from the social constraints of the East. That sounds like Hayes. Blackwell agreed. He always did have a philosophical streak. Is that why you became a marshal? To build something meaningful? Blackwell considered this. I became a marshal because I believe in order, in rules that protect the innocent. Out here, that's not always popular. The West attracts people who want freedom from constraints, but true freedom requires justice. He looked at Charlotte directly. What about you? What made a Philadelphia schoolteacher agree to marry a man she'd never met halfway across the country? The question was fair, if personal. I suppose I was seeking my own fresh start. After the war, Philadelphia changed. So many young men never returned, and those who did were often broken in ways that weren't always visible. Charlotte stared into the fire, memories surfacing of the hospital wards where she had volunteered, filled with young men missing limbs or staring vacantly at nothing. My parents died of influenza in '67. My brother moved to California. Teaching provided security, but not much else. And Hayes's letters offered something more. They offered possibility, Charlotte said simply. His words painted a picture of a life with purpose, with room to grow. He described Montana as a place where the past mattered less than what a person chose to make of themselves. That appealed. To me, Blackwell nodded, understanding in his eyes. Hayes always did have a way with words. That he does, Charlotte agreed, a small smile playing on her lips, though I suspect his description of Montana winters might have been somewhat romanticized. This drew a rare chuckle from the Marshal. Most likely. Nothing romantic about 4 feet of snow and temperatures cold enough to freeze your breath. Their conversation drifted to lighter topics as the fire burned down to embers. Charlotte learned that Blackwell had been a marshal for 8 years, that he preferred the territorial assignments despite their dangers, and that he had never married. The job doesn't allow for much of a home life, he explained. When they retired to their separate bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, Charlotte found sleep elusive, despite her physical exhaustion. Her mind kept returning to Benjamin, trying to reconcile the thoughtful, educated man from his letters with the image of a Confederate soldier, and now an accused murderer. People contain multitudes, she reminded herself. The true measure of a person was not in their past, but in their choices, their principles, their actions when tested. By that measure, what did Benjamin's refusal to sell his land, even under pressure, say about him? And what did Marshal Blackwell's willingness to help a former enemy say about him? With these thoughts swirling in her mind, Charlotte finally drifted into a fitful sleep. They broke camp at dawn the next morning and continued their journey, making good time despite the challenging terrain. By midday, they had reached a high ridge that offered a spectacular view of the valley below, where the territorial capital of Helena sprawled along the base of Mount Helena, its buildings a mix of sturdy stone structures and wooden facades. "We'll reach the city by evening," Blackwell said as they paused to rest the horses. "There's a respectable boarding house where you can stay. I know the proprietor. She'll ask no questions. And tomorrow, we visit the prison. First thing. I've sent a wire ahead requesting a meeting with the warden. My position should guarantee us access to Hayes, though they may limit our time with him." Charlotte nodded, her stomach knotting with anticipation and nervous energy. After traveling so far, she would finally meet Benjamin face to face, albeit under circumstances neither of them could have imagined. What would she say to him? What would he say to her? Would he be changed by his imprisonment? Bitter, perhaps? Or would he still be the thoughtful, optimistic man whose letters had captivated her? As if reading her thoughts, Blackwell said quietly, "Prison changes a man, Miss Harrington. Prepare yourself for that." They reached Helena as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the busy streets. Unlike Silver Creek, Helena pulsed with energy and commerce, the legacy of the gold rush that had established the city a decade earlier. Miners, merchants, and politicians mingled on the boardwalks, while freight wagons and carriages navigated the broad thoroughfares. True to his word, Blackwell escorted Charlotte to a neat boarding house run by a stern-faced widow named Mrs. Reynolds, who greeted the Marshal with obvious respect and Charlotte with muted curiosity. "The lady is engaged to Benjamin Hayes," Blackwell explained. "Simply, we're here on official business regarding his case." Mrs. Reynolds raised an eyebrow but asked no questions, showing Charlotte to a small but comfortable room on the second floor. "Breakfast at 7, she said briskly. "Marshal Blackwell knows where to find me if you need anything else." After arranging to meet at 6:30 the next morning, Blackwell left to secure lodging for himself and to confirm their appointment at the prison. Alone for the first time since leaving Silver Creek, Charlotte unpacked her small traveling bag and changed into a fresh dress, the blue one she had originally planned to wear when meeting Benjamin for the first time. Too restless to remain in her room, she ventured downstairs to the small parlor where several other guests were gathered. A middle-aged gentleman was reading a newspaper by the fire, while two women engaged in quiet conversation by the window. Charlotte selected a book from the small shelf in the corner and settled into an unoccupied chair, though her mind was too preoccupied to focus on the words before her. "Excuse me," a voice interrupted her pretense of reading. It was the gentleman with the newspaper. "I couldn't help overhearing. You're engaged to Benjamin Hayes?" Charlotte tensed slightly but maintained her composure. "I am. Do you know him?" "Not personally, but his case caused quite a stir in these parts." The man folded his newspaper, revealing a thoughtful face framed by spectacles. "Walter Simmons, attorney at law. I followed the trial with professional interest." "And what was your opinion, Mr. Simmons?" Charlotte asked carefully. Simmons glanced around the parlor, then lowered his voice. "Professionally speaking, the proceedings were irregular. The speed of the trial alone raised concerns among those of us who value due process." He studied Charlotte's face. "May I ask what brings you to Helena, Miss Harrington?" "Charlotte." "Harrington." She hesitated, unsure how much to reveal to this stranger. "I've come to visit Mr. Hayes." "With Marshal Blackwell, I understand." Simmons nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting. The Marshal's involvement suggests there may be developments in the case." "Are you familiar with Marshal Blackwell?" "By reputation only. He's known for his thoroughness and his, shall we say, stubborn Commitment to justice, even when it's inconvenient for powerful interests. Simmons reached into his vest pocket and produced a business card. If you and the Marshal are seeking legal counsel regarding Mr. Hayes's situation, I would be happy to offer my services. Charlotte accepted the card, reading the elegant script. Walter Simmons, attorney at law, specializing in criminal appeals and property disputes. Thank you, Mr. Simmons. I'll discuss it with Marshal Blackwell. Do that. Simmons rose, collecting his newspaper. And Miss Harrington? Be careful whom you trust in Helena. The Holloway family has connections here as well as in Silver Creek. With that cryptic warning, he bid her good night and left the parlor, leaving Charlotte with a fresh set of questions and concerns. She slept poorly that night, her dreams a confused jumble of prison bars, rushing water, and faceless men on horseback. She woke before dawn, exhausted but too anxious to return to sleep. After dressing with care in her most respectable traveling suit, a sensible grey wool with minimal adornment, she went downstairs to find Blackwell already waiting in the dining room, nursing a cup of coffee. "You look tired," he observed as she joined him. "Nervous about seeing Hayes?" "Yes," she admitted, "and I had an interesting conversation last night with a lawyer staying here, Walter Simmons. He seemed to know about Benjamin's case." Blackwell frowned. "Simmons? I know the name. Respectable enough from what I've heard. What did he want?" Charlotte explained the encounter, including Simmons's offer of legal assistance and his warning about the Holloway family's connections. "He's not wrong about the Holloways having influence here," Blackwell said grimly. "Victor Jr. was educated in Helena, and his sister married into the Prescott family. Old money, political power. As for Simmons's offer, we may indeed need legal counsel if we're to pursue an appeal. But first, let's hear what Hayes has to say." After a light breakfast, they set out for the territorial prison, a forbidding stone structure on the outskirts of the city. Surrounded by a high wall topped with guard towers, the prison presented an imposing silhouette against the morning sky. At the main gate, Blackwell presented his credentials and explained their purpose to the guards. After a brief wait, they were escorted to the warden's office, a surprisingly comfortable room with polished furniture and landscape paintings that seemed at odds with the grim institution housing it. Warden Thomas Griffin was a heavy-set man with a military bearing and calculating eyes. He greeted Blackwell with professional courtesy, and Charlotte with barely disguised curiosity. "Marshal Blackwell, Miss Harrington, this is an unusual request, a social visit to a convicted murderer." "Miss Harrington is Hayes's fiancée," Blackwell explained. "And as I mentioned in my telegram, I'm investigating irregularities in his case." Griffin's expression remained neutral. "I understand. However, you should know that my authority extends only to the welfare of prisoners while they're in my custody. I have no influence over legal proceedings." "Understood," Blackwell nodded. "We're simply requesting a meeting with Hayes." "Very well. I've arranged for you to use the visitor's room. You'll have 30 minutes, standard procedure for non-legal visits." Griffin rang a small bell on his desk, and a guard appeared at the door. "Take Marshal Blackwell and Miss Harrington to the visitor's room, then bring prisoner Hayes from Block C." The visitor's room was small and austere, containing only a wooden table and 4 chairs. A barred window provided the only natural light, casting striped shadows across the worn floorboards. A guard stationed himself by the door as Charlotte and Blackwell took seats on one side of the table. Charlotte's heart pounded in her chest as they waited. Her hands, folded in her lap, felt cold, despite the warmth of the day. What would she say to the man she had travelled so far to marry, now imprisoned for murder? How would she tell him about their exploration of his ranch, their discovery of his journal, Holloway's desperate search for the water survey? Before she could organize her thoughts, the door opened, and 2 guards escorted a man into the room. Benjamin Hayes, Charlotte's First impression was of height and dignity. Despite the prison uniform and the shadows under his eyes, Benjamin Hayes carried himself with an unmistakable air of self-possession. His dark hair, flecked with silver at the temples, was neatly combed, and his beard, though fuller than in the photograph he had sent her, was trimmed. But it was his eyes that captured her attention, intelligent, penetrating, and filled with a complex mix of emotions as they fell upon her. "Charlotte," he said, his voice deep and slightly hoarse, as if from disuse. "You came." She rose instinctively, as the guards removed his handcuffs and directed him to the chair opposite her. "Of course I came, Benjamin." For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the reality of their first meeting under these circumstances settling over them like a heavy blanket. Then, Benjamin's gaze shifted to Blackwell, and a shadow crossed his features. "Nathan," he acknowledged, with a slight nod. "I wasn't sure you'd received my letter." "I did," Blackwell replied evenly. "I was out of town when everything happened. By the time I returned, you were already here." Benjamin studied him for a moment, then nodded again, accepting the explanation. He turned back to Charlotte, his expression softening. "I'm sorry. You had to find me like this. It wasn't what I had planned for us." "I know," Charlotte said simply. "I've read your journal, Benjamin. We know you didn't kill Victor Holloway." His eyes widened slightly. "You found my journal. Where?" "At your ranch," Blackwell answered. "Charlotte and I went there 2 nights ago. We also know about the water survey." Benjamin glanced toward the guard by the door, then leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Not here. The walls have ears, and the Holloways have friends everywhere." He turned to Charlotte, his expression earnest. "You should return east, Charlotte. It's not safe for you in Montana. Victor Jr. won't stop until he has my land, and he won't hesitate to harm anyone who stands in his way." "I'm not leaving," Charlotte said firmly. "Not until your name is cleared and you're released from this place." A mix of admiration and concern crossed Benjamin's face. "You're exactly as I imagined from your letters. Brave and stubborn in equal measure." His voice took on a more urgent tone. "But you don't understand what you're up against. The Holloways, Judge Prescott, they're part of a larger plan involving the railroad and water rights throughout the territory. I was gathering evidence when they framed me." "The water survey," Blackwell surmised. "It proved something significant, didn't it?" Benjamin nodded imperceptibly. "More than you can imagine. That's why Victor Sr. came to my property that day, not to discuss stray cattle, but to make one final offer for my land. When I refused again, he threatened to expose certain irregularities in his son's business dealings if I didn't sell. I think that's why he was killed." "By whom?" Charlotte asked. "I don't know for certain, but I have my suspicions. Victor Jr. has a foreman named Silas Murdoch, former bounty hunter with a reputation for solving problems permanently. He would have had access to my property, could have taken my rifle." "We need proof," Blackwell said, "and we need to find that water survey. Where did you hide it?" Benjamin hesitated, his eyes again flicking to the guard. "My grandfather's sea chest in the attic. There's a false bottom. The survey is there, along with other documents. Land deeds, water rights certificates, correspondence with the territorial governor about the railroad contracts." Charlotte exchanged a glance with Blackwell. They had been right about the hiding place, but hadn't had the opportunity to search the chest before Holloway and his men arrived. "One more thing," Benjamin continued, his voice dropping even lower. "Check the southeast corner of my property, where the creek enters. The surveyor marked something there, evidence of diversion work. Someone's been tampering with the natural flow of the creek, redirecting water. That's illegal under territorial law." "Who would do that?" Charlotte asked. "The Holloways. They've been stealing my water for months, trying to devalue my property, while strengthening their claim to the water rights. It's all part of their plan to control the entire watershed before the railroad arrives." A knock at the door signaled that their time was nearly up. Benjamin reached across the table suddenly, taking Charlotte's hand in his. His touch was warm, his fingers calloused from years of ranch work. "I'm sorry for bringing you into this," he said, his eyes holding hers. "But I'm not sorry you're here. Seeing you, it gives me hope." Charlotte squeezed his hand. "We'll get you out of here, Benjamin. I promise." "Be careful," he warned. "Trust Nathan, he's a good man, despite our differences." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "And if you're determined to stay, you might consider taking possession of my ranch. As my fiancé, you could claim the right to manage the property. In my absence, it would give you legal standing against the Holloways." "Is that possible?" Charlotte looked to Blackwell. "Technically, yes," the Marshal acknowledged. "Under territorial law, an engaged woman has certain rights regarding her fiancé's property if he's unable to manage it himself. It's unusual, but it could work." "Then that's what I'll do," Charlotte said with determination. "I'll protect your land until you return to it." The guard approached, signaling the end of their visit. Benjamin rose as they reattached his handcuffs. "The water survey is the key," he said urgently. "Find it before the Holloways do, and watch out for Murdoch. He's dangerous." As the guards led Benjamin away, he looked back once, his eyes finding Charlotte's. In that brief moment, something passed between them, an unspoken connection, a promise made without words. Then he was gone, the heavy door closing behind him with a finality that echoed in the small room. Outside the prison gates, Charlotte and Blackwell paused to collect their thoughts. The morning sun had risen higher, burning away the mist that had shrouded the prison walls earlier. "We need to return to Silver Creek immediately," Blackwell said. "Find that water survey before Holloway's men do." Charlotte nodded, her mind already racing ahead. "And I need to file the legal paperwork to take possession of Benjamin's ranch. If what he says is true about water diversion, we'll need access to his property to gather evidence." As they walked back toward the city center, a new sense of purpose energized Charlotte's steps. The meeting with Benjamin had transformed her understanding of the situation. This was no simple land dispute or frame-up, but part of a larger conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of territorial governance. Benjamin Hayes might be imprisoned, but his spirit remained unbroken. And now, Charlotte Harrington, the Eastern schoolteacher who had come west seeking marriage, found herself instead taking up the mantle of defender, protector, and perhaps even avenger. The path ahead would be dangerous, filled with powerful enemies and uncertain allies. But as she walked beside Marshal Blackwell through the streets of Helena, Charlotte felt more alive than she had in years, more certain of her purpose, more determined to fight for justice, and for the future she and Benjamin might still build together. The return journey to Silver Creek took on a new urgency. Rather than spending another night on the trail, Blackwell pushed them to ride longer hours, stopping only when the horses needed rest. They traveled in a tense silence for much of the way, each absorbed in their own thoughts about what they had learned from Benjamin. As they crested the final ridge overlooking Silver Creek Valley late on the third day, Charlotte reined in her horse beside Blackwell's. The town lay spread out below them, peaceful in the golden afternoon light, giving no hint of the corruption and conspiracy that lurked beneath its quiet surface. "What's our first move?" she asked, brushing a strand of wind-blown hair from her face. "We split up," Blackwell decided, after a moment's consideration. "I'll go directly to the courthouse to file the paperwork for your claim on Hayes's property. You'll go with Deputy Miller to the ranch to search for the water survey before Holloway's men discover we're back." "Is that wise? Separating, I mean." "It's necessary. We're racing against time. Holloway will have heard by now that we visited Hayes in prison. He'll know we're closing in on the truth." Charlotte nodded, understanding the logic even as apprehension tightened in her chest. "Very well, but be careful, Marshal. If the Holloways have as much influence as Benjamin suggests, they could have allies anywhere. A shadow of a smile crossed Blackwell's face. I've been dealing with men like Holloway for a long time, Miss Harrington, but I appreciate your concern. They entered town from the north, keeping to side streets to avoid notice. At the Marshal's office, Deputy Miller greeted them with evident relief. "Thank goodness you're back," he said, helping Charlotte dismount. "Things have gotten tense while you were gone. Sheriff Rankin's been asking questions about where you went, and Holloway's men have been watching the office." Inside, Miller explained that he had maintained the story about Blackwell investigating cattle rustling near the northern border, but Rankin seemed suspicious. "And there's something else," he added, lowering his voice. "Judge Prescott arrived yesterday from the county seat. He's staying at Holloway's ranch." "That's not a coincidence," Blackwell said grimly. "They're planning something, all the more reason to move quickly." He outlined their plan to Miller, who nodded his understanding. "I'll get the buckboard ready and escort Miss Harrington to the Hayes Ranch," the deputy said. "But we should wait until dusk, less chance of being spotted leaving town." While they waited for nightfall, Charlotte changed into more practical clothes that Sarah Miller provided, a simple blouse, divided riding skirt, and sturdy boots. She was securing her hair into a practical braid when a knock came at the door. Sarah answered it, then hurried upstairs to Charlotte's room. "There's a gentleman here to see you," she said. "Says his name is Walter Simmons, the lawyer from Helena." Charlotte exchanged a glance with Blackwell, who had followed Sarah upstairs. "Did you tell anyone we were back?" she asked Miller. "No, but it's a small town. Word travels fast." Blackwell checked his sidearm. "I'll speak with him first." Downstairs they found Simmons waiting in the Marshal's office, briefcase in hand, looking remarkably unruffled for a man who had presumably made the same journey from Helena that had left Charlotte exhausted. "Marshal Blackwell, Miss Harrington." He greeted them with a slight bow. "I hope you don't mind my calling unannounced. I took the liberty of following you from Helena, though at a discreet distance." "Why?" Blackwell asked bluntly, his hand resting casually near his holster. "Professional interest initially," Simmons admitted. "The Hayes case has bothered me since the trial. When I overheard you were visiting him, I saw an opportunity to perhaps offer my services." He placed his briefcase on Blackwell's desk and opened it, removing several documents. "However, my journey became more purposeful when I observed Judge Prescott leaving Helena on the same day as yourselves, bound for Silver Creek. That struck me as significant." "And why would that concern you, Mr. Simmons?" Charlotte asked. Simmons straightened his spectacles. "Because, Miss Harrington, I've been building a case against Judge Prescott for some time now, documenting instances of judicial misconduct, conflicts of interest, and possible corruption. The Hayes trial was, in my professional opinion, a travesty of justice, but it was merely one example among many." "Why haven't you brought these concerns to the territorial governor?" Blackwell asked, still suspicious. "Insufficient evidence." "Suspicions are not proof, Marshal, as you well know." Simmons gestured to the documents on the desk. "However, I believe the Hayes case might provide the concrete evidence needed to bring formal charges against Prescott, if we can establish that he knowingly convicted an innocent man to further a conspiracy involving water rights and railroad contracts. The attorney's candor was either genuine or an elaborate act. Either way, Charlotte found herself inclined to trust him, at least provisionally. Blackwell seemed less convinced, but pragmatic. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Simmons?" "A formal partnership. You have the authority of a federal marshal. Miss Harrington has the personal connection to Hayes, and I have the legal expertise to navigate the territorial court system. Together, we might achieve what none of us could accomplish alone: justice for Benjamin Hayes and exposure of the corruption that has taken root in this territory." "And your fee?" Blackwell asked pointedly. A thin smile crossed Simmons's face. Let's call it a contingency arrangement. When Hayes is exonerated and able to resume control of his property, which will be worth considerably more once the railroad comes through, he can compensate me appropriately. Until then, consider my services pro bono." Charlotte and Blackwell exchanged a glance. It was a calculated risk, bringing another person into their confidence, but Simmons could prove invaluable if he was indeed who he claimed to be. "We need to verify your credentials," Blackwell said finally. "Of course. I've taken the liberty of bringing references from the Territorial Bar Association and several satisfied clients." Simmons handed over additional documents. "You'll find everything in order, and to demonstrate my good faith, I've already prepared the legal papers necessary for Miss Harrington to claim management rights to the Hayes property during his incarceration. They merely require her signature and filing with the county clerk." This last gesture tipped the balance for Charlotte. "Thank you, Mr. Simmons, that's extremely helpful." Blackwell examined the papers carefully. "These appear legitimate. I'll verify your references while Miss Harrington and Deputy Miller attend to another matter. If everything checks out, we'll discuss our next steps when you return, Charlotte." With dusk approaching, Charlotte and Deputy Miller prepared to depart for the Hayes Ranch. Sarah provided them with food and canteens of fresh water, while Blackwell gave Miller his spare revolver for Charlotte. "Do you know how to use this?" he asked as she tucked the weapon into her pocket. "My father taught me the basics," Charlotte replied, "though I've never fired at anything but targets." "Let's hope you won't need to now," Blackwell said. "Stick to the plan. Find the sea chest, locate the survey, and return immediately. Don't confront Holloway's men if you encounter them." Charlotte nodded, her heart beating faster with a mix of apprehension and determination. "We'll be careful." As twilight deepened into night, Charlotte and Deputy Miller left town in the buckboard, taking a circuitous route to avoid being spotted. The moon was waxing, but partially obscured by clouds, providing just enough light to see the trail without making them too visible from a distance. They approached the Hayes Ranch from the east, as Blackwell had done on their previous visit. This time, however, the property appeared deserted. No lights shone in the windows, and no horses were visible in the corral. "Too quiet," Miller murmured as they left the buckboard concealed among trees and approached the house on foot. "Holloway's. Men should be patrolling. Perhaps they've given up the search," Charlotte suggested, though she didn't believe it herself. "Or they're setting a trap." Miller drew his revolver. "Stay close." They reached the house without incident, entering through the same back door Blackwell had used during their previous visit. Inside, the house was dark and silent, but Charlotte immediately sensed something was wrong. The furniture that had been neatly arranged during their last visit was now overturned, drawers pulled out and emptied onto the floor, wallpaper torn in places where someone had apparently checked for hidden compartments. "They've ransacked the place," she whispered, dismayed at the destruction. "Looking for the water survey," Miller agreed, "but they didn't find it, or they wouldn't have been so thorough." He lit a small lantern, keeping the flame low. "The attic. Where would the entrance be?" Charlotte recalled Benjamin's letters, where he had described completing renovations on the house. "The master bedroom, I think." He mentioned installing a pull-down ladder. They made their way upstairs carefully, wincing at each creaking floorboard. The master bedroom had not escaped the searchers' attention. The mattress was slashed, the dresser drawers scattered across the floor, the wardrobe, doors hanging open. "There," Miller pointed to a rectangular outline in the ceiling. He set the lantern on the dresser and located the pull cord that had been tucked against the wall. The ladder descended smoothly, surprisingly quiet for its size. "I'll go first," Miller said, handing Charlotte the lantern. "Pass that up once I'm inside." The deputy ascended the ladder, disappearing into the darkness of the attic. After a moment, he called down softly, "All clear. Come up, but mind your step. There are only boards laid across the joists in some places." Charlotte passed up the lantern, then climbed the ladder carefully, mindful of her skirts. The attic was larger than she had expected, running the length of the house with a peaked ceiling that allowed standing room in the center. The space was dusty but organized, with trunks and crates stacked neatly along the walls. "Look for a sea chest," she whispered, taking the lantern from Miller. Benjamin said it belonged to his grandfather. They searched methodically, working their way through the stored items. Charlotte found family photographs, books, winter clothing, all the accumulated possessions of a man who had built a life. In this remote territory, it was strangely intimate, examining Benjamin's belongings without his presence, learning small details about him through the items he had chosen to keep. "Miss Harrington," Miller called softly from the far corner of the attic. "I think I found it." Charlotte joined him, holding the lantern higher. Before them stood an old sea chest, its wood darkened with age, brass fittings tarnished but still intact. The chest was secured with a heavy padlock. "We need the key," Miller said, examining the lock. Charlotte remembered something from one of Benjamin's letters, an offhand comment about hiding keys. "Check under the chest. He mentioned keeping spare keys beneath items, held in place with wax." Miller knelt, running his hand along the underside of the chest. "There's something here." He worked for a moment, then produced a key, small globs of wax still clinging to it. "Clever man, you're Mr. Hayes." The key turned smoothly in the lock, despite its hiding place. Miller lifted the lid carefully, revealing the chest's contents: neatly folded blankets, old navigational instruments, a ship's log from the 1830s, and various mementos from a sailor's life. "His grandfather was a sea captain," Charlotte explained, carefully removing the items and setting them aside. Benjamin mentioned him often in his letters. When the chest was empty, Miller examined the interior carefully. There should be a mechanism or hidden catch for the false bottom. Charlotte ran her fingers along the inside edges of the chest, feeling for irregularities. In the back right corner, she found what she was seeking, a small depression that gave slightly under pressure. When she pressed it, they heard a soft click, and the bottom of the chest shifted. Miller carefully lifted the false bottom, revealing a shallow compartment beneath. Inside lay several bound documents, land deeds, letters, and a leather portfolio, labeled Hydrological Survey of the Silver Creek Watershed, Hayes Property. "This is it," Charlotte breathed, opening the portfolio. Inside were detailed maps, technical drawings, and a comprehensive report full of scientific terminology she didn't fully understand. But the summary page was clear enough. Benjamin's property sat atop a massive underground aquifer that fed Silver Creek and potentially could irrigate thousands of acres of surrounding land, regardless of surface rainfall. This would make the Hayes Ranch the most valuable property in the territory once the railroad arrives, Miller said, skimming the report. Control of this water would mean control of agricultural development throughout the Southern Valley. Charlotte examined the other documents. Among them was a contract with the railroad company, offering Benjamin a substantial sum for a right-of-way across his property, a contract he had apparently not yet signed. There was also correspondence with the territorial governor regarding water rights legislation and proposed regulations for equitable distribution of water resources. Benjamin wasn't just protecting his own interests, Charlotte realized. He was advocating for fair access to water for all ranchers in the region that would have undermined the Holloways' plan to monopolize water rights. No wonder they wanted him out of the way, Miller agreed. We need to get these documents back to Marshal Blackwell right away. As they carefully returned the contents to the hidden compartment, Charlotte suddenly froze. "Did you hear that?" Miller extinguished the lantern immediately. In the sudden darkness, the sound became clearer, horses approaching, several of them, moving at a steady pace toward the ranch house. "Holloway's men," Miller whispered. "They must have been watching the property after all. We need to hide." Charlotte said, her heart pounding. "We can't make it back down and out of the house before they arrive." "Take the documents," Miller replied, helping her gather the most crucial papers. "I'll create a diversion, draw them away from the house. You wait until it's clear, then make your way back to the buckboard. If I'm not there in 20 minutes, go without me." "I can't leave you," Charlotte protested. "You must. These documents are more important than either of us. They're Benjamin's only chance for justice." Before Charlotte could argue further, the sound of boots on the front porch confirmed their time had run out. Miller checked his revolver, then squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. "Remember, 20 minutes, then go. Stay in the attic until it's safe to move." He descended the ladder silently, pulling it up after him and closing the attic access to conceal Charlotte's presence. Alone in the darkness, Charlotte clutched the documents to her chest, listening intently to the sounds below. She heard the front door open. Men's voices, one she recognized as Victor Holloway Jr.'s, giving orders to search the house again. Then Miller's voice, surprisingly calm, identifying himself as a federal deputy. "What are you doing here, Miller?" Holloway demanded, his tone hostile. "Official business, Mr. Holloway. Marshal Blackwell received a report of trespassing on the Hayes property. Since this land is currently under federal jurisdiction pending resolution of ownership claims, I'm investigating." "This land belongs to me," Holloway snapped. "Hayes forfeited any claim when he murdered my father." "That's for the courts to decide," Miller replied evenly. "Now, if you and your men would kindly leave the premises." The sharp crack of a gunshot cut through the night, followed by a heavy thud. Charlotte stifled a gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. More gunfire erupted, accompanied by shouts and the sound of breaking glass. "Find the water survey," Holloway was shouting above the chaos. "Tear this place apart if you have to." Heart racing, Charlotte forced herself to think clearly. Deputy Miller had likely been shot, perhaps killed. Soon, Holloway's men would search the house systematically, eventually discovering the attic. She needed an escape route, and fast. Moving carefully, across the beam-lined floor, she made her way to a small window at the far end of the attic. It was narrow, but might be large enough for her to squeeze through. Outside, she could see the sloped roof of the back porch directly below. If she could reach it, she might be able to drop to the ground and escape unseen while Holloway's men were occupied with searching the house. With trembling fingers, Charlotte secured the documents inside her blouse, then worked to open the window. Years of disuse had sealed it shut, but desperation lent her strength. Finally, it opened with a groan that sounded deafening in the quiet attic. She froze, listening for any indication that the sound had been noticed. The commotion continued below, furniture being overturned, Holloway barking orders, taking a deep breath. Charlotte eased herself through the narrow opening, feet first, clutching the window frame for support. When her feet touched the roof of the porch, she carefully lowered the rest of her body until she was lying flat against the sloped surface. The night air was cool against her face as she inched her way toward the edge of the roof. Below her, the ground seemed very far away in the darkness. There were no convenient shrubs or trellises to break her fall, just hard-packed earth that would show no mercy if she landed badly. From her vantage point, she could see several horses tethered at the front of the house and what appeared to be Deputy Miller's motionless form on the porch. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away. There would be time for grief later. Now she needed to focus on escaping with the vital documents. Charlotte lowered herself as far as possible, hanging by her fingertips from the edge of the roof. Then let go, dropping the final few feet to the ground. The impact sent a shock through her ankles and knees, but nothing seemed broken. Crouching in the shadows, she waited, watching for any sign that her escape had been detected. When no alarm was raised, she began to move carefully away from the house, keeping to the deepest shadows, heading for the trees where they had left. The buckboard, the weight of the documents against her chest, reminded her with every step of what was at stake. Not just Benjamin's freedom, but justice for a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of territorial power. If she could reach Silver Creek with the evidence, they had a chance. If she was caught, everything would be lost. Charlotte's lungs burned as she ran through the darkness, staying low among the trees. The documents pressed against her skin beneath her blouse, their edges digging into her ribs with each labored breath. Behind her, shouts echoed from the ranch house as Holloway's men realized someone had escaped. "Check the perimeter! She couldn't have gone far!" A horse whinnied nearby. One of Holloway's men was circling toward her position. Charlotte froze, pressing herself against the rough bark of a pine tree, willing her breathing to quiet. The rider passed within 15 feet of her hiding place, his attention focused on the open ground beyond the trees, rather than the shadows where she concealed herself. When he had moved on, Charlotte continued her careful progress toward the spot where they had left the buckboard. The clouds had shifted, allowing more moonlight to filter through the trees, both a blessing and a curse. She could see her path more clearly, but was also more visible to her pursuers. After what felt like an eternity, she spotted the buckboard, still hidden where they had left it. The horse was agitated, sensing the commotion at the ranch, but had remained tethered. Charlotte approached cautiously, murmuring soothing words to settle the animal. "Easy now. Easy," she whispered, stroking its neck before checking the harness. Everything seemed in order, but Charlotte had never driven a buckboard alone. In Philadelphia, she had occasionally handled the reins of her father's gentle mare, but this was different. A working wagon horse in unfamiliar, dangerous territory. No choice now but to try. Charlotte climbed onto the seat, gathering the reins. In trembling hands, she cast one last glance toward the ranch house, where lanterns moved about like fireflies as Holloway's men continued their search. There was no sign of Deputy Miller, no way to know if he was alive or dead. The thought sent a jolt of grief through her, but she forced it aside. Time for mourning later, if mourning was needed. Charlotte flicked the reins lightly, and the horse started forward with a jerk that nearly unseated her. She struggled to maintain control as the buckboard creaked and swayed over the uneven ground, every sound seeming impossibly loud in the quiet night. "There, by the trees!" A shout went up from near the ranch. Charlotte snapped the reins harder, abandoning stealth for speed. The horse broke into a trot, then a gallop as she urged it forward along the rough trail leading back toward Silver Creek. Behind her, she heard horses in pursuit, gaining ground quickly. The buckboard bounced violently over ruts and rocks, threatening to throw her with each impact. Charlotte clung to the seat with one hand, the reins with the other, teeth clenched against the jarring ride. A shot rang out, then another, the bullets whistling past her. Charlotte ducked instinctively, nearly losing her grip on the reins. The trail curved ahead, following the contour of a shallow ravine. If she could reach the bend, she would momentarily be out of sight of her pursuers, a chance, however slim, to evade them in the darkness. The buckboard rounded the curve at dangerous speed, the outer wheels lifting slightly before slamming back down. Charlotte felt the wagon slide on the loose gravel, then right itself as the horse charged forward. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter as the trees and curve of the ravine provided temporary cover. Ahead, the trail forked, one path continuing towards Silver Creek, the other branching north toward the foothills. Charlotte made a split-second decision, steering the horse onto the northern trail. Holloway's men would expect her to head directly for town. By taking the longer route, she might lose them in the labyrinth of trails that wound through the foothill country. The gamble worked. As she climbed higher into the rugged terrain, the sounds of pursuit faded, then disappeared altogether. Still, Charlotte maintained her speed, knowing they would soon realize their mistake and split up to cover both routes. The moon slipped behind clouds again, plunging the trail into near darkness. Charlotte was forced to slow the exhausted horse to a walk, trusting its surer vision to keep them on the path. her own eyes strained to penetrate the gloom, alert for any sign of danger. It was nearly midnight when Charlotte finally caught sight of Silver Creek's distant lights in the valley. Below, she had taken a wide, circuitous route that had added hours to her journey, but appeared to have successfully shaken her pursuers. The horse was lathered with sweat, its breathing heavy. Charlotte patted its neck gratefully. Not much farther. "Now, friend," she murmured. As she guided the buckboard down toward town, Charlotte considered her options. Riding directly to the Marshal's office might expose her to Holloway's men who had likely returned to town by now. But where else could she go? She needed to get the documents to Blackwell immediately and to report Deputy Miller's shooting. A sudden inspiration struck her. Jacob Wilson, the general store owner who had first greeted her upon her arrival in Silver Creek, had seemed sympathetic to Benjamin's cause. His store was on the edge of town, and he lived in rooms above it. If she could reach him, he might be able to get a message to Blackwell discreetly. Decision made, Charlotte directed the horse toward the far side of town. Approaching Wilson's general store from the rear alley, the building was dark, as expected at this late hour. She secured the buckboard behind a stack of empty crates, then made her way to the back door and knocked softly. Long moments passed with no response. Charlotte knocked again, louder this time, fear mounting that Wilson might be a deep sleeper, or, worse, that Holloway's influence had reached him too. Finally, a light appeared in an upstairs window. Moments later, the back door opened a crack, revealing Wilson's wary face illuminated by a candle. "Who's there?" he demanded, then his eyes widened in recognition. "Miss Harrington? What in heaven's name—" "Please, Mr. Wilson," Charlotte interrupted, her voice urgent. "I need your help. Deputy Miller has been shot at the Hayes Ranch, and men are searching for me. I have documents that must reach Marshal Blackwell immediately." Wilson's expression shifted from surprise to concern. He opened the door wider, ushering her inside. "Come in, quickly. My wife is visiting her sister in Helena, but my son is upstairs. He can fetch the Marshal." Inside the store's back room, Wilson lit an oil lamp, casting warm light over shelves of inventory and a small desk used for bookkeeping. Charlotte sank gratefully into a chair, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was, how much her muscles ached from the wild ride through the night. "You're injured," Wilson observed, pointing to a tear in her sleeve stained with blood. Charlotte glanced down in surprise. She hadn't noticed the wound, likely from a branch or bullet graze during her flight through the trees. "It's nothing. Please, we must get word to Marshal Blackwell." Wilson nodded, calling upstairs for his son, a lanky boy of about 16 who appeared moments later, pulling suspenders over his nightshirt. "Brendan, go to the Marshal's office through the back streets. Tell Blackwell that Miss Harrington is here and Deputy Miller has been shot at the Hayes Ranch. Be careful. Don't let anyone see you." The boy nodded solemnly, clearly understanding the gravity of the situation, and slipped out into the night. "Now," Wilson said, turning back to Charlotte, "let me see to that arm while we wait." Despite her protests that the wound was minor, Wilson insisted on cleaning and bandaging the shallow gash. As he worked, Charlotte explained what had happened at the ranch, finding the water survey, Holloway's arrival, Miller's confrontation, and her escape through the attic window. "Holloway's gone too far this time," Wilson said grimly. "Shooting a federal deputy, that's a hanging offense." "If we can prove it," Charlotte agreed. "But it was dark, and I didn't actually see who fired the shot." "Even so, with the water survey, as evidence of motive and the other documents you found," Wilson shook his head, "the Holloways have held power in this valley for too long. People are afraid to stand against them." "Are you afraid, Mr. Wilson?" Charlotte asked quietly. He met her gaze steadily. "I've lived in Silver Creek for 20 years, Miss Harrington. Built my business from nothing, raised my family here. I've seen what happens to those who cross the Holloways, but there comes a point when a man must decide what kind of world he wants to leave for his children." He finished tying the bandage. "So, no, I'm not afraid. Not anymore." The quiet declaration moved Charlotte deeply. Here was the frontier spirit Benjamin had described in his letters, not just the rugged self-reliance, but the moral courage to stand for what was right, even at personal cost. Less than 30 minutes later, Marshal Blackwell arrived, with Brendan guiding him through the back entrance. His face was etched with concern as he took in Charlotte's disheveled appearance. "Thank God you're safe," he said, surprising her with the emotion in his voice. "When Miller didn't return with you, I feared the worst." Charlotte quickly recounted what had happened at the ranch, including Deputy Miller's shooting. Blackwell's expression darkened with each detail, his hand unconsciously moving to rest on his holstered revolver. "And the documents?" he asked. Charlotte removed the water survey and other papers from within her blouse, spreading them on Wilson's desk. "Everything Benjamin mentioned is here. The hydrological survey, the railroad contract, correspondence with the territorial governor, and something else." She pointed to a stack of deeds and legal papers. "Records of water rights, transfers throughout the valley, all acquired by shell companies that appear to be controlled by the Holloways through intermediaries." Blackwell examined the documents intently. "This is it. Evidence of a conspiracy to monopolize water rights before the railroad's arrival is publicly announced, with the Hayes property at the center of it all because of the aquifer." "What about Deputy Miller?" Charlotte asked, the image of his fallen form haunting her. "We need to help him. If he's still alive." "I'll organize a party to ride to a ranch at first light," Blackwell decided. "Going now in darkness would be too dangerous. Holloway's men will be watching all approaches." He turned to Wilson. "Jacob, I'll need your help. We need trustworthy men, armed and ready to ride by dawn." Wilson nodded. "I know several who've had run-ins with the Holloways, men who've lost grazing rights or been forced to sell land at unfair prices. They'll stand with us." "What about Mr. Simmons?" Charlotte asked. "The attorney from Helena." "His credentials were checked out," Blackwell confirmed. "He's at the hotel now, preparing legal documents for your claim on the Hayes property. With these new documents as evidence, we can move for Benjamin's immediate release and arrest warrants for Holloway Jr. and Judge Prescott." "We should secure the evidence somewhere safe," Wilson suggested. "If Holloway realizes what we have, he'll stop at nothing to destroy it." "Agreed." Blackwell gathered the documents. "I'll take these to the telegraph office and wire the territorial governor directly. The operator there, Sam Jenkins, served with me during the war. He's trustworthy. We'll send copies of the most damning evidence immediately, ensuring that even if Holloway moves against us, the information survives." As they formulated their plan, a soft knock at the back door startled them. Wilson approached cautiously, revolver in hand, but it was only his son, returning from a reconnaissance mission Blackwell had sent him on. "Marshal," Brendan reported breathlessly, "there are men watching your office and the boarding house. Holloway himself is at the saloon with Sheriff Rankin. They've got riders coming in and out of town. Looks like they're searching for someone." "Miss Harrington," Blackwell concluded. "They know she escaped with the documents." He turned to Charlotte. "You can't stay in town. It's too dangerous." "She can remain here," Wilson offered. "The store has a hidden storage room below the cellar. Originally built for holding valuables during Indian raids years ago. Few people know of its existence." "Thank you, Mr. Wilson, but I won't hide while others risk themselves," Charlotte said firmly. "I came to Montana to marry Benjamin Hayes. Instead, I found him imprisoned and his property threatened. I've claimed his land legally, and I intend to defend it, alongside those brave enough to stand for justice." Her declaration hung in the air, commanding a moment of respectful silence. Then Blackwell nodded, a new regard in his eyes. "Very well, Miss Harrington. But we do this methodically, by the book. First, we secure the evidence and alert the territorial governor. Then we organize a proper posse with federal authority to apprehend Holloway and his men, and to rescue Deputy Miller if he's still alive. And Benjamin? Charlotte asked. How soon can we secure his release? With this evidence and Simmons's legal expertise, we can file for an emergency hearing as soon as the territorial circuit judge arrives next week. But first, we need to neutralize Holloway's influence locally. Dawn was breaking as their strategy took final shape. Wilson had sent word through trusted channels to a half-dozen local ranchers who had suffered under Holloway's machinations. They would gather at a predetermined location outside town, then ride together to the Hayes Ranch to search for Deputy Miller and secure the property. Meanwhile, Blackwell would telegraph the territorial governor and the federal marshal's office in Helena, requesting additional deputies and a formal investigation into Judge Prescott's conduct. Simmons would file the legal papers claiming the Hayes property for Charlotte and prepare motions for Benjamin's release based on the new evidence. Charlotte would remain at Wilson's store until the posse was ready to ride. Though she had argued to accompany them immediately, Blackwell had insisted she rest for a few hours, a concession she reluctantly accepted after realizing she could barely keep her eyes open. Wilson showed her to a small but comfortable guest room above the store, where his wife usually hosted visiting family members. Too exhausted to undress completely, Charlotte removed only her boots before collapsing onto the bed. Despite her racing thoughts and concerns for Deputy Miller and Benjamin, sleep claimed her almost instantly. She woke to the sound of urgent voices below. Sunlight streamed through the window. She had slept for several hours. Charlotte quickly pulled on her boots and splashed water on her face from the basin before hurrying downstairs. In the store's back room, Blackwell was in intense conversation with Wilson and 3 other men Charlotte didn't recognize. Their expressions were grim, and they fell silent when she entered. "What's happened?" she demanded, a knot of dread forming in her stomach. Blackwell stepped forward. "There's been a development. Judge Prescott has convened an emergency session of the territorial court here in Silver Creek. He's ordered the immediate forfeiture of the Hayes property to cover alleged unpaid taxes and legal judgments." "He can't do that," Charlotte protested. "I've filed a legal claim as Benjamin's fiancée. Prescott is claiming your engagement lacks legal standing without a formal announcement in a territorial newspaper," Simmons explained, entering from the front of the store. "It's a procedural technicality, but one he's using to invalidate your claim." "When is this hearing?" Charlotte asked. "This afternoon," Blackwell replied. "Prescott is moving quickly, hoping to transfer the property to Holloway before the territorial governor can intervene. Then we must move more quickly," Charlotte said, her mind racing. "Mr. Simmons, can you delay the proceedings somehow? Give us time to organize our evidence and witnesses?" The attorney nodded thoughtfully. "I can file a series of motions questioning jurisdiction and procedure. It won't stop Prescott, but it might slow him down by a few hours." "That's all we need," Blackwell agreed. "My telegram to the governor was sent at dawn. If he responds quickly and sends official intervention, Prescott's authority can be suspended pending investigation." "What about Deputy Miller?" Charlotte asked, the memory of his fallen form still vivid. A shadow crossed Blackwell's face. "Still no word." "I sent 2. Meant to scout the Hayes property at first light, but they haven't returned." The implications were clear. Either the men had been captured, or what they found at the ranch had delayed their return. Neither possibility boded well. "We can't wait any longer," Charlotte decided. "If Judge Prescott transfers Benjamin's property to Holloway this afternoon, everything Benjamin worked for will be lost, and with it, any leverage we have to secure his freedom." "What are you suggesting?" Blackwell asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. "I'm going to appear at that hearing," Charlotte declared. "As Benjamin's fiancée, I have the right to contest any action against his property, and I'm Going to bring every piece of evidence we have, showing the Holloway's conspiracy, the true value of the water rights, and Judge Prescott's conflict of interest. That's incredibly dangerous, Wilson warned. You'd be walking into the lion's den. Prescott can have you removed from the courtroom, even arrested for contempt. Not if the proceedings are public, Simmons interjected, a calculating gleam in his eye. If we can ensure the courtroom is filled with witnesses, ordinary citizens of Silver Creek, Prescott will be constrained in his ability to silence Miss Harrington without revealing his true motives. A public hearing? Blackwell nodded slowly. That could work. Prescott and Holloway have gone to great lengths to keep their water rights scheme quiet. Exposing it in open court before the town's citizens would force them to either abandon their plan or reveal their corruption for all to see, Charlotte finished. Either way, we create an opportunity to protect Benjamin's property and present the evidence of his innocence. As the others discussed the legal strategy in greater detail, Charlotte moved to the store's front window, gazing out at the awakening town of Silver Creek. Somewhere beyond those familiar buildings, Benjamin Hayes sat in a prison cell, framed for a murder he didn't commit. Somewhere, Deputy Miller might be lying wounded or dead for trying to help her. And somewhere, the corrupt forces that had orchestrated this injustice were preparing their final move. The crossroads she had reached was not the one she had expected when she left Philadelphia, but Charlotte found herself oddly at peace with the path before her. Whatever happened in that courtroom this afternoon would decide not just Benjamin's fate, but her own, and perhaps the future of the entire Silver Creek Valley. The Silver Creek Courthouse, normally a sleepy outpost of territorial justice, buzzed with unusual activity as Charlotte approached. Word of the emergency hearing had spread through town like wildfire, drawing curious onlookers and concerned citizens alike. Jacob Wilson's efforts to ensure a public audience had clearly succeeded. People crowded the wooden steps and spilled onto the street in front of the modest building. Charlotte paused at the edge of the crowd, drawing a deep breath to steady herself. She wore her finest dress, the same blue traveling outfit she had arrived in less than a week ago, now cleaned and pressed by Mrs. Wilson, who had returned from Helena that morning. Her honey-blonde hair was arranged in a simple but elegant style, and she carried a small leather portfolio containing copies of the most crucial documents. Marshal Blackwell materialized at her side, his formal uniform lending him an added air of authority. "Are you ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Charlotte replied, squaring her shoulders. "Any word from your scouts at the ranch?" Blackwell's expression darkened. "They returned just before noon. They found signs of struggle at the house, blood on the porch, but no sign of Miller. They believe he was taken somewhere, either by Holloway's men or, if he survived, he might have managed to escape into the hills." The news settled like a stone in Charlotte's stomach. She had hoped for better, but at least there was a chance the deputy still lived. "And the men you sent to watch Holloway?" "He's inside already, with Prescott and Sheriff Rankin. They've brought in extra security, claiming concerns about public disorder, but really to intimidate anyone who might speak against them." Charlotte nodded, unsurprised. "And Mr. Simmons, already inside, filing his delaying motions as planned. He's secured us seats at the front." Blackwell offered his arm. "Shall we?" Together they ascended the courthouse steps, the crowd parting before them with murmurs of curiosity and support. Charlotte was surprised to see many faces she didn't recognize, not just Silver Creek residents, but people from surrounding ranches and farms, drawn by the controversy surrounding Benjamin Hayes and the Holloways. Inside, the courtroom was packed to capacity, with every bench filled and people standing against the walls. At the front, Judge Samuel Prescott sat behind an elevated desk, his thin face set in lines of impatience as he reviewed documents before him. To his right, Victor Holloway Jr. conferred with his attorney, a sharp-featured man Charlotte hadn't seen before. Sheriff Rankin stood near the judge's bench, hand resting meaningfully on his holstered revolver. Walter Simmons rose as Charlotte and Blackwell entered, gesturing them towards seats at the plaintiff's table. As they made their way forward, Charlotte felt the weight of every gaze in the room. Some curious, some hostile, many simply waiting to see how this unusual drama would unfold. "Miss Harrington," Simmons greeted her formally. "Marshal, I've filed motions contesting jurisdiction and requesting postponement until the federal authorities can review the case. Judge Prescott has denied them all, as expected, but the delays have given us time for the gallery to fill." "Good work, Counselor," Blackwell murmured. "Any response from the governor's office?" "Not yet. But I have a man watching the telegraph office who will bring word immediately if anything arrives." Judge Prescott banged his gavel, bringing the room to order. "This court is now in session. We are here to address the matter of Hayes versus Territorial Revenue Office regarding unpaid taxes and legal judgments against the property of Benjamin Hayes, currently incarcerated for the murder of Victor Holloway Sr. Prescott's framing of the case immediately set a prejudicial tone, Charlotte noted. He was presenting Benjamin's guilt as an established fact, though they now had evidence suggesting otherwise. "The territory," Prescott continued, "represented by District Attorney James Morgan, petitions for forfeiture of said property to satisfy outstanding debts, with subsequent public auction to the highest bidder." The district attorney, a portly man with a florid complexion, rose to present the territory's case. His argument was simple. As a convicted felon, Benjamin Hayes had forfeited certain rights, including the ability to contest property seizures. For tax purposes, according to records he presented, the Hayes ranch owed 3 years of back taxes plus penalties. "This is absurd," Charlotte whispered to Simmons. "Benjamin was meticulous about his finances. He would never have fallen behind on taxes." "Of course not," Simmons agreed. "Those records are almost certainly falsified, but challenging them directly would take weeks of investigation. Time Prescott knows we don't have." When the district attorney concluded, Simmons rose to present their defense. "Your Honor, I represent Miss Charlotte Harrington, fiancée of Benjamin Hayes, who claims management rights to the property during Mr. Hayes's incarceration. We have filed the appropriate documents with the county clerk's office establishing Miss Harrington's legal interest in the property." Prescott frowned. "Mr. Simmons, this court has already ruled that without a published announcement of engagement in a territorial newspaper, Miss Harrington's claim lacks standing. Do you have new evidence to present on this matter?" "We do, Your Honor." Simmons produced a folded newspaper from his briefcase. "This is the Helena Independent, dated September 15th of last year. On page 4, you'll find an announcement of the engagement between Benjamin Hayes of Silver Creek and Miss Charlotte Harrington of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania." Murmurs swept through the courtroom as the newspaper was handed to the judge. Charlotte stared at Simmons in shock. Such an announcement had never been made, to her knowledge. "A necessary legal fiction," Simmons whispered to her. "The editor of the Independent owes me a favor. The back issue was created this morning and entered into their archives." Prescott examined the newspaper with obvious displeasure. "This appears to be in order," he admitted reluctantly. "Very well, Miss Harrington may address the court regarding her interest in the Hayes property." Charlotte rose, heart pounding, but voice steady. "Thank you, Your Honor. I contest the territory's claim that Benjamin Hayes owes back taxes. I have here," she removed documents from her portfolio, "receipts for all tax payments for the past 5 years, signed and stamped by the Territorial Revenue Office." This was another of Simmons's clever manipulations. The receipts were genuine, but had been obtained just that morning from territorial records in Helena through a clerk sympathetic to their cause. Benjamin had indeed paid his taxes faithfully. The district attorney's claims were fabricated, as they had suspected. The district attorney sputtered objections, but Prescott was forced to examine the receipts. His expression soured further as he realized the trap closing around him. If he rejected legitimate tax receipts in open court, his bias would be obvious to all observers. These appear to be in order, he finally acknowledged. However, there remains the matter of legal judgments against Mr. Hayes related to water rights disputes with neighboring properties. Neighboring properties owned by the Holloway family, Charlotte clarified for the benefit of the audience. A family to which your honor is related by marriage, creating what many might consider a conflict of interest. Gasps and murmurs erupted around the courtroom. Prescott's face darkened with anger. You are dangerously close to contempt, Miss Harrington. My familial relationships have no bearing on my judicial rulings. Perhaps not, Charlotte agreed smoothly, but the extensive financial relationships might. I have here documents showing that your honor has invested substantially in Holloway Consolidated Holdings, a company that stands to benefit enormously from the acquisition of the Hayes property, particularly given what we now know about the aquifer beneath it. The courtroom erupted in chaos at this revelation. Prescott banged his gavel repeatedly, demanding order. Victor Holloway Jr. leapt to his feet, face contorted with rage, only to be restrained by his attorney. When relative calm was restored, Prescott spoke through clenched teeth. Miss Harrington, these allegations are serious and completely irrelevant to the matter at hand. This court will not entertain conspiracy theories or unfounded accusations. Then perhaps the court would prefer to hear from an eyewitness to attempted murder, Charlotte countered. A collective gasp ran through the gallery. Last night, Deputy U.S. Marshal Frank Miller was shot while investigating water rights tampering on the Hayes property, tampering ordered by Victor Holloway Jr. to devalue the land and force its sale. This is outrageous, Holloway shouted, breaking free of his attorney's restraining hand. The woman is delusional. I have the sworn testimony of Jacob Wilson, who heard my account immediately after I escaped from the Hayes Ranch, with evidence that Victor Holloway has been illegally diverting water and conspiring to monopolize water rights throughout the valley. Charlotte gestured to Wilson, who stood solemnly in the gallery. Prescott's gavel slammed down again. Enough! This hearing concerns tax obligations, not wild accusations of conspiracy and murder. Miss Harrington, if you cannot confine your statements to the matter at hand, you will be removed from this courtroom. The matters are inseparable, Your Honor, Charlotte insisted. The taxes were falsified, the water rights disputed in bad faith. All as part of a larger scheme to seize control of the Hayes aquifer before the railroad's arrival makes it the most valuable property in the territory. The crowd's reaction showed her words were having an impact. Many of Silver Creek's citizens had suffered under Holloway's water rights manipulations without understanding the larger pattern. Now, connections were being made, grievances recognized, as part of a systemic problem rather than isolated misfortunes. Prescott conferred hurriedly with the district attorney, then with Sheriff Rankin. When he spoke again, his tone was ice-cold. This court is not the appropriate venue for criminal allegations. If Marshal Blackwell wishes to investigate claims of water rights tampering or violence against a federal deputy, he may do so through proper channels. For now, we will proceed with the matter of property forfeiture. It was a strategic retreat, Charlotte realized. Prescott was trying to compartmentalize the issues, dealing with the property matter immediately while delaying any criminal investigation until after Holloway had secured the land. Before she could respond, the courtroom doors burst open. A young man, Wilson's son, Brendan, rushed in, waving a telegram. "Marshal Blackwell," he called out. "Urgent message from the territorial governor." The crowd parted as Brendan made his way forward, handing the telegram to Blackwell. The marshal read it quickly, a smile spreading across his normally stoic features. "Your Honor," Blackwell said, rising to his feet, "I have here an executive order from Territorial Governor William Howard, temporarily suspending all property proceedings related to the Hayes Ranch pending a federal investigation into irregularities. In the case of Montana Territory versus Benjamin Hayes, the governor has also ordered the immediate transfer of Benjamin Hayes to Silver Creek for an evidentiary hearing regarding new information that has come to light. Prescott's face went from red to purple. This is highly irregular. The governor has no authority to interfere with ongoing judicial proceedings. Actually, Your Honor, Simmons interjected smoothly, under Territorial Statute 47, Section 12, the governor may intervene in any case where evidence of judicial impropriety has been presented. I believe Miss Harrington's documentation of your financial interests in the outcome of this case qualifies. For a long moment, the courthouse hung in suspended animation, all eyes on Judge Prescott as he visibly calculated his options. His authority was being challenged publicly, his relationship with the Holloways exposed. Whatever he decided at this moment would define his future in the territory. Finally, Prescott snatched up his gavel. This court is adjourned until further notice. All property proceedings related to the Hayes Ranch are stayed pending review by the governor's office. With that final pronouncement, he stood abruptly and exited through a side door, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. The courtroom erupted in excited conversation. Charlotte felt a wave of relief so profound her knees nearly buckled. Simmons steadied her with a discreet hand at her elbow. "Well done, Miss Harrington," he murmured. "That was as fine a piece of courtroom theater as I've witnessed in 20 years of legal practice." "It wasn't theater," she replied. "Everything I said was true," which made it all the more effective. Simmons glanced across the room to where Victor Holloway Jr. was engaged in a heated discussion with his attorney. "Be on your guard, though. Men like Holloway don't surrender power gracefully. This fight isn't over yet." As if to underscore Simmons's warning, Holloway broke away from his attorney and approached their table, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. "This isn't finished," he hissed, quiet enough that only Charlotte, Blackwell, and Simmons could. "Here, you've made a powerful enemy today, Miss Harrington. Governors can be influenced, witnesses can disappear, evidence can vanish. You won't win." "Step back, Holloway," Blackwell warned, his hand moving to his revolver. Holloway smirked. "Always hiding behind a badge, Blackwell, but badges only protect you when you're wearing them." With that cryptic threat, he turned and stalked from the courtroom, his supporters trailing in his wake. "What did he mean by that?" Charlotte asked. "Nothing good," Blackwell replied grimly. "We should assume he's planning some kind of retaliation. The governor's intervention has bought us time, but Holloway still has resources and influence. Then we use the time wisely," Charlotte decided. "When will Benjamin arrive from Helena?" "According to the telegram, he's already en route under federal escort. Should arrive by tomorrow afternoon." The news sent a flutter of anticipation through Charlotte's chest. After everything that had happened, she would finally have more than a brief prison visit with the man she had traveled so far to marry. But their reunification would be complicated by the danger that still surrounded them. "What about Deputy Miller?" she asked. Blackwell's expression sobered. "Still missing, but with the governor's backing, I can organize a proper search party now. Holloway's men won't dare interfere with a federal operation." "I want to help," Charlotte said firmly. "Miller risked his life to help me escape with the evidence. I won't abandon him now." Before Blackwell could respond, Jacob Wilson approached, his expression grave. "Marshal, Miss Harrington, you need to come quickly. There's someone at my store asking for you. Says he has information about Deputy Miller." They followed Wilson through the dispersing crowd and back to the general store. In the back room, slumped in a chair with a bloodied makeshift bandage around his shoulder, sat a man Charlotte didn't recognize, one of Holloway's ranch hands by his appearance. "This is Pete Rawlins," Wilson explained. "He worked for Holloway. Came in the back way about 10 minutes ago, looking like death warmed over." I ain't going back, Rollins said, his voice weak but determined. Not after what I saw. Holloway's gone mad. When he heard about the governor's telegram, he started giving orders, said he'd burn the Hayes place to the ground before he'd let anyone else have it. Where's Miller? Blackwell demanded. Old line shack up in the foothills north of the Hayes ranch. They took him there after the shooting. He's alive, or was when I left. Murdoch wanted to finish him, but Holloway said to keep him alive for questioning. Murdoch? Charlotte asked. Silas Murdoch? Benjamin mentioned him, said he was Holloway's foreman, a former bounty hunter. Rollins nodded. That's him. Meanest son of a meanest man I ever met. He shot your deputy, then shot me when I objected to taking a lawman prisoner, said I was going soft. He gestured to his wounded shoulder. I played dead till they left, then made my way here. Figured you folks were my only chance at protection from Murdoch? He don't leave loose ends. You did the right thing, Blackwell assured him. We'll get you to a doctor, and in return, I expect your full cooperation with the federal investigation. You'll have it, Rollins promised. I've had my fill of the Holloways. There's others who feel the same, just been too scared to speak up. As Wilson tended to Rollins' wound, Charlotte pulled Blackwell aside. We have to move quickly. If Holloway's planning to burn the ranch, I know. Blackwell nodded grimly. I'll gather men immediately. Wilson's already rounded up volunteers. We'll head for the line shack first, rescue Miller if he's still there, then secure the Hayes. Your property. I'm coming with you, Charlotte declared, anticipating his objection. And before you protest that it's too dangerous, remember that I've already escaped from Holloway's men once, saved the evidence that's bringing Benjamin home, and faced down a corrupt judge in open court. I think I've earned the right to see this through to the end. Blackwell studied her for a long moment. Then a rare smile crossed his features. Hayes is a lucky man, he said finally, whether he knows it yet or not. 3 hours later, a group of 15 riders, including Charlotte, Blackwell, Wilson, and several local ranchers with grievances against the Holloways, set out from Silver Creek. Each man was armed and determined, united by a common cause that transcended their individual motives. Some sought justice for past wrongs, others merely wanted to end the Holloways' stranglehold on the region's water, but all recognized that this confrontation had been years in the making. As they rode toward the foothills where Deputy Miller was supposedly being held, Charlotte found herself reflecting on the extraordinary path that had led her to this moment. She had left Philadelphia seeking marriage and stability, only to find herself embroiled in a conflict that would determine the future of an entire community. The woman who had stepped off that stagecoach less than a week ago would hardly recognize. The woman now riding to confront corrupt powers alongside federal lawmen and frontier ranchers. Whatever happened in the hours ahead, Charlotte knew with certainty that Silver Creek had changed her irrevocably. And perhaps, in some small way, she'd begun to change Silver Creek as well. The afternoon sun hung low on the horizon as they crested a ridge overlooking the Hayes property in the distance. Beyond it, the future waited, uncertain, dangerous, but filled with possibilities she had never imagined when she first agreed to become a mail-order bride to a Montana rancher she knew only through his letters. And somewhere on the trail between Helena and Silver Creek, Benjamin Hayes was returning, home, to his ranch, to justice, and to the woman who had fought to make it all possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.